Hello, I'll be presenting on Otto Ketting's Intrada, which is a piece for unaccompanied trumpet or horn that Ketting composed in 1958. So just a bit of context and background information about the composer. And all of the information that I'll talk about here comes from the Grove entry on Otto Ketting by Brandt, and there will be a reference at the end of the presentation. Ketting was a Dutch composer born in 1935, and the trumpet was actually his main instrument. And so this is automatically something that's relevant to the piece we're looking at today, because this is an example of Ketting writing for his own instrument, which he didn't do very often. Most of his works are for chamber ensemble or other solo instruments or for orchestra. So Brandt talks about Ketting's work as combining tonal and atonal features and being expressive in a way that was similar to Berg, but also being influenced by Webern and by Stravinsky. So the Intrada is about a 4-minute long piece, which is slightly variable depending on how much time different performers take with each phrase. And there are sort of two sections, an opening that's marked tranquillo and is lyrical and sort of fantasia-like, and then the decido, which is a fanfare-like section. You can see I've marked them on the music to make it a little bit more obvious. We then get a return after the decido to the lyrical themes of the first section. And that's why I've suggested that this is similar to a rounded binary form. We sort of have this A, B, A prime structure. But I think we can also break the form down in a lot more detail than this. So Ketting doesn't divide the piece using measures. Instead, he divides phrases with double bar lines, like you can see right here and here. And this divides the piece into 12 different sections. So I've numbered each of the 12 sections, calling them sections, section 1, section 2, etc. And we're going to look at a few of the important themes before looking more in depth at pitch set classes and how the different sections connect. So section 1 is our main theme. It starts the piece off and then it also comes back and concludes the tranquillo section in section 6. So this theme from section 1 basically bookends the tranquillo. It sounds like this. Section 2 is also really important, and the theme here is basically just an extension of section 1. However, this part does not repeat at the end of the tranquillo section. It only comes back at the very end of the piece, which we can see as sort of an A prime. I've also put a bit of section 3 here because this is interesting. While this is still part of the tranquillo, which is mostly lyrical, we get some sort of fanfare-like material. It sounds like this. So this is going to get further developed in the decido, but we kind of get a hint of the fanfare early in the tranquillo. Speaking of the decido, section 7 is where it starts, and we basically get this fanfare progression with a lot of perfect fourths. So the beginning of it sounds like this. And this repeats about 3 times within section 7 with some variation on each one, and it gets progressively higher as we go through the section. Then in section 8, we get the climax of the piece, which sounds like this. And section 9 is extremely similar. It sounds like this. And a lot of performers like to take a big pause between section 8 and 9 because there is a fermata over the bar line, but I really like to ignore that and go right into section 9 from section 8. This is a lot more technically difficult on the trumpet, so it sort of shows off a little, but I also think it emphasizes the climax because typically between sections, we have this fermata over the bar line and there's a pretty significant pause. So I think to blow straight through that really, really emphasizes the climax here. When you put them together, it sounds like this. So we've seen the two sections of the piece in contrast to each other and how they're connected by the overarching form. Now I'm going to focus in on a sort of internal analysis of the phrases. And I think this will really show how Ketting unifies the piece by using sets of pitch classes that repeat and invert, whether this was intentional or not. So the first thing I noticed in analyzing this way is the way that the phrases end in the tranquillo sections. We get all of these little 3-note patterns at the ends of phrases. The end of section 1 is a 0, 2, 3, and this inverts for the ends of sections 2, 3, and 4, all of which have the same 0, 1, 3. Interestingly, sections 1, 2, 3, and 4, even though they're all made up of exactly the same intervals, they're all pretty different. So the ending of section 1 starts with a descending minor third and then an ascending whole step. The ending of section 2 starts with the same descending minor third, but with a different rhythm, followed by a half step. Section 3 uses an ascending minor third and then a descending whole step. And then section 4 is the only one where we get the pitches in closer order, and we have a descending whole step and then a half step. At the ending of section 5, we have a similar idea, but altered to be a major third instead of a minor third, and still that same half step. So instead we get 0, 1, 4. And of course, the sections that repeat exactly as they were in their initial occurrence, they have the exact same pitch classes as they did the first time. So this section of the piece, the decido, is really interesting to look at using pitch class sets. So the first thing that stands out here is this motif of perfect fourths, which makes sense considering the fanfare-like nature of this section. So I've labeled in the darker blue all of the instances of just fourths here, and these are the pitch class set 0, 5. And then really the whole section gets built on this underlying interval of a fourth, because we then get this instance here of 0, 2, 5, 7, labeled in the periwinkle color. And this really just builds off the initial 0, 5. So we can see that this is really just made up of sets of perfect fourths. We have the B flat and E flat, the C and the F, and then of course the F and the B flat, creating this passage that is really just all fourths. This 0, 2, 5, 7 motif then gets developed and changed some. So the next time it occurs right here, we only have 3 notes, 0, 2, 7, and we get the perfect fourth here between the G and the C and the C and the F. We then get this series of just fourths labeled in the darker blue, so E flat to B flat and then G flat to D flat. This then progresses to 0, 2, which is sort of an isolation of part of the 0, 2, 5, 7, but we just take the whole step from it. This gets repeated 4 times, and each time it's raised a half step higher. So the first note of each triplet eighth note figure is E, then F sharp, then G. That sounds like this. And that concludes section 7. And then section 8 then begins. We have the 0, 2 again. And then at the climax of the piece, which I played earlier, we get the whole 0, 2, 5, 7 again with the fourths between G to C, C to F, and F to B flat. This is really strong. I mean, we're getting 3 separate perfect fourths in it. And lastly, section 9 repeats our 0, 2 isolation of the 0, 2, 5, 7 motif again. So this is all really interesting because we can really see that all of this passage is just built off of the interval of a perfect fourth, the 0, 5 at the beginning. So just to quickly review and conclude, this piece is made up of 12 sections divided by double bars, and the performer can choose how much time to spend between each section, especially because the piece is unaccompanied. This gives a lot of freedom for interpretation. The piece has a sort of A-B-A prime form where the themes from the Tranquillo come back after the Decido section and round the piece off. In the Tranquillo sections, we get these really nice 3-note phrase endings made up of 0-2-3s or 0-1-3s, and in one case, a 0-1-4. And this gives the entire section a really cohesive sound, especially at the ends of phrases, which are significant. And in the Decido section, we have this fanfare that's built all around the interval of a perfect fourth. I write 0-2-5-7 with the parentheses like that because I think this really shows that it's the 0-5 interval that's the basis for everything else that gets built around it. I think knowing all of this and really having this strong theoretical framework for this piece can make performing it a lot more interesting and enjoyable. And certainly as a listener, I think it can be really interesting to listen for repeated passages as we go through the form and to listen for the pitch class sets that we've identified. So the source I mentioned in giving context about Ketting is referenced right here, and thank you for listening.